So Bird Box Barcelona has just been released, and it's safe to say that the universe that we all found extremely interesting in 2018 with the first movie was a place that we didn't expect to be visiting again. With the first movie having a lot of attention and providing a story that was extremely gripping, I thought I'd compare the two movies, elaborate on their similarities and differences, and determine which one was better. So take your blindfold down, as it's okay to look at this as I present to you Bird Box Barcelona versus Bird Box 2018. By the way, if you want to do me a solid, then feel free to hit the subscribe button. Thanks. The story. In terms of the story, I would say that the original Bird Box movie had a much more complex, convincing, and gripping plot when compared to the Barcelona version. Within the most recent movie, we saw a story that was very similar to the first installment. There was a group of individuals that were looking to find safe haven at a different location, as they predicted that a community was able to thrive there due to the environment that it was in. Plus, the young girl Sophia's mother was predicted to be there. However, we saw this particular story being told from the perspective of Sebastian, somebody who was immune to the gaze of the monster, and instead was a part of the cult that went around exposing people's eyes and forcing them to look upon it. This was a type of character that we were introduced to in the original movie, and to be honest, they came across as a lot more crazy in the first one, rather than as a planned cult that was recruiting and causing harm. I would say that the Barcelona Bird Box's story just felt a little bit like a pointless trip, as they were all already in a location where they had food, and a community that had trust ingrained within it. They were risking it all for Sophia, and there was no guarantee that her mother was even going to be there. Plus, with a heavy focus being on the cult, I found it to be a bit more dramatic and exaggerated when compared to how the original movie was, rather than honing in on the characters and going on a personal journey with them where we felt what they were feeling. With the original movie, the story had multiple layers to it, and its pacing allowed it to progress in a way that had you constantly hooked. We saw the journey be something that was necessary because Mallory was on her own with 2 children, and she had no way of surviving due to the threat that was present from the people that didn't need a blindfold. We saw the slow demise of the group that she was in, and all of them being picked off one by one another, and also the monster. Even when things were okay, there was the introduction of Gary, who was one of the individuals that forced people's eyes open, and he ultimately twisted the mood and the tone of the movie on its head. I felt like we really got to learn about and understand Mallory, and the absent, non-connecting relationship that she had with the 2 children that were in her care. The fact that she didn't name them and was a lone ranger anyway, but then, by the end, was in a blind panic and stating, "Do not take my children." It was a moment that you really felt, as it was in such contrast to how she had been for the most part of the movie, and the growth and development had occurred, showing that she cared for them more than she cared about herself, despite not originally showing it, something that you never would have imagined before. There were elements of ridiculousness in the Barcelona story that I wasn't really a huge fan of, such as when people would be walking on the edge of buildings and they'd almost do like a Matrix-style move to avoid falling off. And also the jump that Claire did with Sophia right at the end to get on the cable car was something that just wouldn't have been possible. I know that it's not real, but they just took exaggerating to another level and crossed an unbelievable line, in a movie that didn't really feel like it would do that. Obviously, in the original movie, navigating the rapids of a river completely blind is something that would probably be near on impossible, but it felt in line with the story and like it needed to happen for the story to progress and the character development to occur. It also felt more realistic than some of the things that we saw in the Barcelona version. Both of the movies had elements of past tense and present day tied into them, which worked in both of them. Hearing of Sebastian's daughter that essentially haunted him and was telling him to do these bad things was something that was heartbreaking to watch, because you could feel the sense of grief and mourning that he was still in, yet the monster was using that inside of his mind to make him evil. And also with the original movie, I enjoyed seeing the present day, but also as far back as 5 years ago, with it then tying back into the present day time period when they were on the river. It was a smart and creative way to do it, and I thought it made the connection feel seamless. With regards to the stories then, I think the original movie takes it hands down. It was far more gripping, actually had an emotional pull, especially when Mallory referred to them as her children and didn't want them to be taken, plus the ending, where the safe haven was a school for blind individuals. I would also say that the original movie focused more on suspense instead of jump scares, which is what this next chapter of this video will be focused on. Jump scares versus suspense. Even though the movies are part of the same universe and follow a similar narrative when you strip it down to the bare bones, tonally, they are both completely different. The first movie doesn't really have many jump scares in it at all. It focuses more on suspense and making you feel uncomfortable in the situation that we're watching unfold. Whereas in the most recent movie, it felt like it focused more on bringing jump scares to the party, rather than luring you into a false sense of security and making you fear the environment that the group were in. This was something that was extremely different to the first movie, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, but I feel with the world that was initially created, the suspense is definitely the more appropriate and suited route to go down, as the world is hostile, unpredictable, and can cause death in a matter of seconds. And I think instilling long-term fear into the viewer rather than a brief moment of shock is far better of a viewing experience. So I definitely preferred the original movie for that approach. The cast. Both movies have great casts that really do allow the characters to shine. Within Barcelona, Mario Casas as Sebastian gave a performance that was extremely convincing, and he did a great job at carrying the movie. His connection with all of the characters felt so real to watch, and the emotion that he delivered was believable too. Even though the Barcelona cast was a lot more intimate and contained, there were still performances that shone amongst it. The original Bird Box movie had what you would describe as more of a star-studded cast, with the likes of John Malkovich, Sandra Bullock, and Tom Hollander, and the level of performance was definitely top tier. With there not being a bad performance or an unconvincing one in the runtime at all, Sandra Bullock's ability to channel her emotion and cause it to evoke feelings from the viewer in a movie that didn't really have an emotional plot to it was something that was extremely impressive, and really highlighted the quality of the cast. When it comes to the supporting cast and the performances that were delivered, despite both of them being good, I would say that the characters in the original movie were a lot more fleshed out, and they each had their own real backstories that went deeper than just working as a delivery driver or being in a married couple, like what we saw in Bird Box Barcelona. I would say that if the runtimes were drastically different, then I could understand a lack of connection being made, but there was only a 20-minute difference, so not that much at all. So in terms of the overall cast and characters, I would give this to the original movie. Conclusion. Overall, I would say that the best movie out of the both of them is the original one. From the plot, to the tone, to the cinematography, the score, the performances, and the ending. It trumps the Barcelona Bird Box movie on every level, and provided something that will probably never be beaten in its own franchise and series of movies. Based on this second movie, I would say that there doesn't need to be another one made. I could see a Netflix series working, but still. The first movie works in its own right, and we saw the sheer amount of risk that one would go to in order to find safe haven from a world that was riddled with the being that caused the worst thing possible, whilst also seeing its outbreak and how it impacted society. Whilst Bird Box Barcelona was an enjoyable ride and a movie that provided familiarity and a story that was semi-enjoyable to watch with strong performances, the original movie takes this one home all day long. Which movie do you prefer? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.